Welcome to the Coaching Crowd podcast with me, Zoe Hawkins, and my friend and co-host, Joe Wheatley.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. Today, we are talking about coaching imposter syndrome. And the reason that we're talking about this is we often see posts in our Coaching Crowd Facebook group where coaches are looking for additional resources to support coachees who come to sessions, describing that they have imposter syndrome, they're experiencing imposter syndrome, they are imposters. And often coaches can feel triggered actually into needing to find a solution to support their clients to move out of this horrible space of being an imposter. So I think today what we're going to do is explore that and debunk it for you.
Yeah, and we have a lot to say on this, don't we? And I think I'm going to start by picking up on what you said there, which is often coaches can feel triggered into wanting to solve this for their clients. And some of that is about the transference of feeling like an imposter themselves. So when a client is describing this thing called imposter syndrome, what that can do in terms of the energetic exchange is lead the coach into feeling like an imposter because they can't fix their client's imposter syndrome. So I think it's just really important as we enter into this discussion to acknowledge that that can happen. It does happen. And when it's happening, that's largely an unconscious process that you would be able to explore in supervision. And of course, imposter syndrome is normal. Like it's hopefully a universal human experience that if you are setting big enough, bold enough, courageous enough goals, of course you're going to feel like an imposter at some point in time. And coaches too are going to feel like imposters when they come up against different client scenarios or things that they're working with the clients on that they feel de-skilled in. It may trigger their own internal imposter. So be aware as a practitioner working with your client that if you start to experience this yourself, check in. Is this mine? You know, am I feeling like the imposter right now? Or actually, am I just picking up on the energy that my client is putting into the space as we are working together?
And where it gets really interesting then is if the coach were to share with the client that, I'm noticing that I'm feeling nervous and a sense of duty and responsibility and a desire to be an expert right now as I'm listening to you describe your experience. And I'm wondering if that's mine or if it's yours. And then all of a sudden the client has an aha and is like, I think I might be feeling like this because everybody in my team is new and they're all feeling those things. And I've been really confused as to why I've been feeling this way because I don't normally feel this way. And, there's an amazing example of how we can use our own experience as a coach when we have the courage to be really honest and trust that there's information coming through that may be helpful to the client. But if we go back to what is imposter syndrome, I cannot stand this expression. I think it is debilitating, unhelpful to label something as a syndrome. And when we think about what is this label, and that's all it is it's a label that we give ourselves, that we've picked up, somewhere. Often, maybe we use it as a protector. By saying that we're an imposter, it's almost like, don't expect very much from me because I'm not going to be very good at this. I'm just pretending to do this. I think what it represents is actually a number of emotions. So emotional experiences that we have. So if you think about for yourself, if you say, I've got imposter syndrome about this, what's the honest truth about it is maybe I'm feeling nervous about this thing that I'm going to do because I've never done it before, or I'm feeling, anxious about this, or I'm feeling hesitant, I'm feeling worried. And then that gives space as we start to enter into like the emotional dialogue as to what other feelings might I be having about this. Is the honest truth that actually I'm a bit excited about this and I'm holding a whole range of emotions, and it's a shorthand to say I've got imposter syndrome about this. Sometimes I think there's an expectation for people that they would have imposter syndrome. So there's quite a lot of complexity around this, but we come because of our emotions coaching practitioner training. Yeah, we translated some of these things into our training. You are not the thing itself. So you are not an imposter. You are having an emotional experience, and let's explore that. What you're experiencing and what you would like to experience, and how we can support you with that gap.
I think the term imposter syndrome, you know, that sort of relates it to disease or sickness in some way, is like that can be healed and it can be fixed. And, you know, if I just do something, then I'm no longer an experience this thing. Whereas I think the angle that we're coming at it from is to say, like, it's okay. Like, yes, you're feeling like an imposter. What are those emotions that you're experiencing, as you've described some of them there? Okay. But how can we work on those? How do you want to feel instead? And like, it's okay to feel fear. It's okay to feel anxiety. It's okay to feel worry, concern, a sense of not belonging. They don't mean anything unless you're going to put a label on them and let that become something. And I think in the sense of the imposter syndrome label, like, it becomes an identity. And like, great. So no longer are you having an experience of feeling anxious or feeling fearful because you've set these big, audacious, exciting goals, or you find yourself in a situation where your skills are being tested and you're no longer the most experienced person in a room. It leads you to focus more on all the negative that brings, rather than being able to look at, okay, how come I am experiencing this imposter syndrome right now? Or better for us, how come I'm experiencing fear? How come I'm experiencing worry? Like, inquire with curiosity into that. And probably what you're likely to find is that you're in a learning zone. You know, you're in a space where you are no longer the most experienced person in the room with the, you know, the biggest accolades, or, you know, the loudest voice to share. You're actually surrounded by people who perhaps know more, or can achieve more, or do more, so it seems. So for me, instead of then sucking up that identity as an imposter whole, you're able to say, okay, what can I learn from the people around me? What inspires me about the environment and the people that I find myself with now? Am I looking to others and thinking, I'd really like a slice of that? Like, they seem to be able to do X, Y, Z so well. Instead of letting that intimidate you, think about, well, what of that do I want for myself, and how might I set myself on the path to be able to achieve that for myself in my own way, in a way that is aligned and authentic to me. So when you become the thing, which is what you were talking about there, it really limits you into a box that you can't come out of. Whereas when you break it down and you look at, how am I having this experience of what is labeled imposter syndrome, you're able to take the individual parts and pick them up one piece at a time. And as coaches and practitioners, I'd encourage us all to, when we work with the clients and we hear this term, to really inquire, what does that actually mean to you? What's the experience that you are having? And what has led you to this point in which you are having this experience? What does that actually mean? And start to bring curiosity to it, rather than accepting it as something that is awful and perhaps needs to be fixed and resolved.
Yeah, and often when clients say I've got imposter syndrome, they're talking very fast. So it'll be like, I've got imposter syndrome, and then they're off onto the next thing, and there's no space. So our role really as a coach is to say, whoa, come back. Let's focus on this first bit. This is what you said. And as you said, tell me a bit more about what that is for you. Because sometimes when we inquire about that, it becomes smaller. The client breaks it down for themselves. They say, did I really say that? Well, what I really mean is that, okay. And then maybe it isn't a huge thing for them to work on, but it's become part of the way they describe it to other people. If we look at it through an NLP lens, neuro-linguistic programming lens, the beliefs within NLP are that we can model excellence. So if we see somebody else do something that we admire, or we think, oh, how on earth did they do that? I can't yet do that. Then, through observation and inquiry and all of the things like that, we can break down how they do what they do, and we can learn how to do it in the way that they have done it. So then we take that learner mindset into it. I think for us as individuals, it's good for us to know what are our triggers. So I think about early on in my career, in fact, in my whole career until we started the business, I found myself always being the youngest person at the level that I was at. So once I started getting promoted, obviously not in the first, starting out in my career, but as I got promoted, and that can be a trigger. Looking around and thinking, I'm the youngest, should I be here? So when I think about imposter syndrome, I think it's about belonging. It's about acceptance. It's about recognition. It's about reintegrating into our identity, who we are now. And, there's a label of imposter syndrome, but from a career perspective, there's also labels of manager, director, CEO, team leader, coordinator, all those different things. And as you progress through to those different places, those different levels, because it's new. So what can people do when we think about managers? How do you support people as they progress? A lot of it is in the preparation, isn't it? It's doing that reintegrating before they get into that position, so that it's not that shock factor. And what are the new narratives that we're going to give? And for ourselves as individuals, is thinking about, what does belonging mean to me? How do I do belonging well? How do I help others to feel that they belong? In what way do I belong to myself?
And I think I mentioned earlier around imposter syndrome being a universal human experience, and if you're experiencing what you will call imposter syndrome, take some moment to celebrate that, because that means that you have stepped outside of your comfort zone. You are in this, unlearning, relearning, reshaping kind of phase, and there's discomfort that comes with that. But brilliant courage for doing that in the first place and not letting that stop you. And then you might reach a point where you're finding the imposter syndrome is stopping you. And that's an opportunity to be able to look at, what support do I need to overcome this next level, like this next hurdle? How do I need to be supported on my journey of growth, rather than coming up against those emotions that feel difficult and shrinking back to keep yourself safe, which is, by the way, also perfectly normal. We are hardwired to seek safety and seek protection. And so when we are stepping outside of our comfort zone and we start to experience that, our whole being is going to want to retreat back. And so there, as coaches, what we're able to do is help our clients to explore not the how do you get rid of the imposter syndrome, but actually how do you need to be supported whilst you're experiencing it? What help might you need to seek? What questions might you need to ask? What additional training might you need in order to help you? So I think there's that avenue of inquiry as well with our clients, is don't instantly think of it as something we need to remove, but actually, how do we work with the experience to get what we need in order to successfully move through it? Because on the other side is a new level of learning, a new level of safety and comfort with the new resources that we've been able to build whilst we're navigating through that phase.
And there are other ways that we can use this as a pivot point, I suppose, in a coaching conversation. So when somebody says, I feel like an imposter right now, then we can ask them, tell me more about that, and explore and unpick, what does that mean for them? We also have an opportunity where we can say, and what else are you? So redirecting the attention. So it's like when we've asked ourselves in the past, like, or we reflect back and think, who are we to create a coaching training program? Or who are we to create our own emotions coaching program that's accredited? Who are we to create a podcast? Actually, if then somebody says, who are you not to? Or we ask ourselves, who are we not to? That's just a really interesting question. And that can be enough to free ourselves from it. And then to move into the next emotion, which might be excitement or joy or freedom, whatever comes after that. So, it's almost like a roundabout in a coaching conversation, and you might explore lots of different avenues of that, exploring the emotional sequencing. So once you've broken down what this shorthand term imposter syndrome is for them, what do they normally feel after fear? What do they normally feel after nervousness? What do they normally feel after wanting to hide away or apologize all the time? What is the behavior that the emotion generates? And what would be a more helpful feeling to have? What would they need to think in order to be able to achieve those things? So we're back into more cognitive behavioral coaching, that link between what we think, what we feel, and then obviously the way that we behave.
There's also that concept, isn't it? You get what you focus on. So if you are focusing on those feelings that you relate to being an imposter, you probably aren't focusing on all the strengths and talents and skills and things that you bring to the role that perhaps other people aren't able to bring into that space. So I think there's a role as a coach when working with a client who talks about, this experience of imposter, is to be able to recalibrate and rebalance with the client. Like, okay, so you're having this experience, and also, where are you bringing the value? What's your unique contribution? Because it's likely if the client is bringing that they've lost the focus on the other elements of who they are. And so, shining the spotlight back on other things so they can continue to focus on all the beautiful assets that they do bring, as opposed to having a deficit approach and focusing on perhaps what they haven't yet developed. And I think that's also important, is to recognize that, is this temporary? Is this feeling of being an imposter temporary for the client, or is it something that they have always experienced? Because they're two very different experiences. So if as the coach, the client can recognize it is related to a particular role or a particular project or something brilliant. If they're experiencing this as like a permanent thing, then maybe there's some signposting there that you can support the client with, to look at, okay, if this has always been present in your life, we can look at what we can do to support you in the here and now with this role and what your goals are. Is there something else that you might want to take and explore in a more therapeutical route to look at the more systemic element of that? And that can be very liberating, and that's okay as well. So I think it's important to acknowledge where is the client at with having that experience, and what is it that they are really trying to address in the coaching space.
I think there's a role of feedback as well in overcoming this identity of imposter syndrome. So that might be you as the coach supporting your client to engage in a 360 type activity. So you can form the questions with the client, can form the questions through the coaching relationship. So not taking an off the shelf 360, but instead creating a bespoke one based on the client's needs in order to overcome this identity that they have associated themselves to of the imposter syndrome. That can be hugely powerful, and you can help to debrief them, because it might be that they're holding on to these fears because of the absence of feedback, and they may be doing an amazing job, but nobody has shared that with them. And then when they get the feedback, that can be an antidote to it, if it's your kind of first level of imposter syndrome, if you like, that Zoe was referring to. Likewise, as the coach, sometimes it can be really powerful for us to offer a reframe to our client. So I work with, I coach people who are CEOs or on a CEO pathway. So often they might be new into a CEO role. So it's a big step up. So they have been, invited into that position because of how great they've performed at that role, and they've had huge confidence in the role before, and then they step into the CEO role, and that feels like a huge burden for them to have and to step into, and they have no idea how to do the role, and often they don't admire their predecessor, so they don't want to model the person that they're taking over from. Sometimes, I'm working with co-founders, and there's also co-CEOs. So how do we do that? And it's a new step for the organization. And so they're often interested in, how do your other clients who are CEOs, how do they do it? what would they be thinking? And so they often then they place a value, I suppose, on my thoughts and observations based on my experience in that way. So the reframe that I'm mentioning here is your client shows up and they're like, I don't think I've got like the presence of a CEO. If I have observed them to have that in the coaching sessions, then I can say, I can offer that as a reframe or as an observation to them. And that can be enough for them to be like, oh, maybe I am then. Maybe I am good enough for this role. Maybe I am already there. Maybe it's okay. And this is the best way. Maybe it's okay for me to do things in my own way. I think that's often a belief, an empowering belief that can release people from the imposter syndrome, because I think imposter syndrome is very much related to being like others.
Yeah.
And actually, there's a conflict because we don't want to be like others. Deep down, we want to be seen and recognized and valued for our own unique contribution and way of being in the world.
It's about radical self-acceptance, isn't it? And recognizing who you are and what you bring, and you know, and knowing and trusting that that has value. Like if somebody's chosen to appoint you to that team, that project, or you've chosen yourself to appoint to the role of coach or whatever it is to accept yourself for who you are and where you're at in your journey, trusting. And I think there's that element of self-trust as well, trusting that you will get what you need in order to continue to grow and to continue to develop. Now, of course, none of that necessarily easy, but all possible when you engage, you know, in a coaching relationship and sort of have conversations about these things. So, you know, never just accept imposter syndrome at face value. Always bring curiosity to it. Think about what are the antidotes to imposter syndrome that you want to support your client to develop. Your courage is one of the things that I focus on in coaching with the, you know, the leaders that I support. I think courage is often like a really hidden talent, an underwritten skill that actually, if you can bring courage to your situation, you know how to be courageous and what courage looks like and feels like to you. That's often a compassionate antidote to feeling like an imposter. So, you know, it's about looking at both sides, isn't it? Yes, what is the imposter syndrome and how do you overcome it? But also accepting there's an element of it, welcoming it in as something that can be useful, and then looking at, okay, how do we want to move forward with coaching outcomes and goals in the knowledge of all of that together?
So if you're listening in and you're a manager or a leader, or you're somebody that's thinking, I'd like to, you know, do some self-work while learning how to support other people in these type of topics, then take a look at our coaching qualifications, and you can take our quiz, which is at mycoachingcourse.com. It'll help you to work out what is the most appropriate or useful level of qualification for you.